All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the California Advancing PREA office hours. This is part of the series, and specifically, we'll be talking about letter writing with incarcerated survivors. This will be recorded, so if you would like to pass this along to your colleagues, you're welcome to do so. And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am Marcela Rojas Salas. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the project managers here at Valor. And I'm joined here with some of my colleagues from Valor and JDI. So I will let them introduce themselves.
I'm unmuted, so I can go. Hi, I'm Edward Cervantes. I'm a senior program officer at Just Detention International, JDI. Yeah, happy to be here with you. I respond to letters and hotline calls and all of that. So I have some experience with that, and I look forward to sharing some of what we've learned with you all.
Hi folks, my name is Jenica Steinor. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a project coordinator here at Valor, and I'm really looking forward to talking about letter writing and getting to talk about this a little bit more and share some of my experience as well. It's good to see you all.
Awesome. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. Since we've introduced ourselves, we'd love to see you all introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what your names are, your pronouns, your agency, where you're located. I know most of you are probably located in California, but I saw some folks from out of state also register. So let us know where you're coming from. Although this is, specific to California, there's so much in here that you're also going to be able to learn from. And so it's not super specific to the point where you won't be able to utilize the information. So, like I mentioned, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. The chat will really be the primary function where we'll be able to communicate with each other. If you have any questions, we'll do our best to respond to you either in the moment or at the end of the presentation. We are going to have some opportunities to ask you all questions, get your feedback, listen to some of the barriers that you've experienced, all that jazz. We want to hear a lot from you and what's coming up for you. We'll also have an opportunity to read through 2 different letters and come up with some responses and some problem areas and barriers that show up in some common things that come up in letter writing with incarcerated survivors. We will also be providing the PowerPoint slides in addition to the recording. So that will go out via our newsletter to anybody who's registered and to anybody who has signed up for our newsletter. And then last but not least, if you are calling in from your phone, go ahead and use *6 to either mute yourself or to unmute yourself. There won't be too much time for unmuting except for in the breakout session. So we will have one short breakout session near the end. So just a reminder, that's *6. And if anybody has any tech support questions, feel free to message me directly. I will be tech support. I'll be doing some of the talking, but I'll be mainly tech support. So definitely reach out to me. Jenica and Edward will be doing a lot of talking. So we just want to make sure that you're asking the person who will be most available to you. And let me check the chat and see where folks are coming from really quickly before I move on. Awesome. North Coast Rape Crisis Center, Partners Against Violence. Welcome, Annalie. Carl from Monterey Rape Crisis Center. Maddie in the San Fernando Valley and Strength United. Awesome to see you here. So many other folks. Really appreciate you all being here. Please continue to introduce yourselves. And a little bit about Valor. If this is a webinar that's new to you, we were formerly the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And while our name has changed, we really do stay committed to preventing and ending sexual violence by advancing equity and eradicating oppression. We provide leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, individuals, and other entities committed to ending sexual violence. And ultimately, we envision a world free from violence, where the dignity of every person is valued and respected. So I'm going to pass it over to Edward to talk a little bit about JDI's mission as well.
Yeah, hey. So JDI is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. JDI's core goals are to work together with corrections officials, rape crisis centers, and policymakers to make detention facilities safe, to change public attitudes, about sexual abuse behind bars, and also to ensure that survivors get the help that they need. It is our fundamental belief that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it takes on an absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. No matter what crime someone has committed, rape is never part of the penalty.
And a little bit about what makes this webinar and really the entire project, which we call California Advancing PREA, possible is that we are funded by the California Office of Emergency Services, also known as CalOES. And through this collaboration, we really hope to be able to provide local rape crisis centers with the resources and support that you all need to establish and provide a full range of services to incarcerated survivors in our state. And so that includes state prisons, federal prisons, county jails, juvenile halls. We're really here to help you be able to provide those services. And if you're not able to provide those services, to help you build those relationships, set up MOUs, learn how to communicate with our correctional partners in a way that really helps us fulfill our mission and our vision within our organizations and also within the jails and prisons. So let's talk about some objectives for today. We're really hoping to help you determine ways to assess the needs of incarcerated survivors via letter correspondence. We know that sometimes we don't get the full load of information within our letters, but there are ways of picking through the letters and really assessing what is it that folks are asking for, either explicitly or implicitly. Secondly, we're hoping to provide strategies to build rapport, trust, and ongoing advocacy with incarcerated survivors. I know that many times advocates will tell me I only was able to meet with someone during the forensic exam, during the SART exam, or I've only gotten one letter from one survivor. And so we really want to be talking about how can we really provide some long-term support to incarcerated survivors. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about some resources and healing materials available to address incarcerated survivors' needs. I know that a lot of the tools and resources that we have are very adaptable to the prison and the jail, but we want to be really conscious of those that aren't adaptable or that aren't available to folks behind bars. So we'll be talking a bit about that today as well. But before we get into those resources and those tools, we're wanting to hear from you all how you've had to adjust your advocacy and pace when responding to letters versus when you're talking to folks on the hotline or you're doing in-person advocacy. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't get the full picture in a letter. Sometimes we're trying to figure out what exactly do they need support on? What exactly is the issue? Where are they in the reporting process, if at all, if they want to report? And so there may be pieces of a letter that you're trying to sort of assess and figure out, what does this person need support on? So sometimes you can do that on the hotline much more quickly than in a letter, not sometimes, but always actually. So I'm wanting to hear again, what are some things that you have needed to adjust as you're responding to letters? And then what are some challenges you've experienced while communicating with survivors through letters? So much more broad question there. And I will drop those questions in the chat, and folks are welcome to respond in the chat or unmute themselves and just let us know what are some of the differences you've seen with letter writing and what are some of the challenges that come up when you're providing advocacy via letter writing. And if you do have any thoughts, feel free to raise your hand. There's the hand raising function. I'm checking to see if anybody has done so. Give folks a minute to think about that as well. No challenges at all. Y'all are like, letter writing is smooth. I got all the answers I need. Claudia, I see you clapping your hand. You're like, I don't have any challenges. I'm a pro.
I did want to share something for us, a difference or a challenge. Sometimes the handwriting is a little bit challenging. So one of the things that we've done is we rewrite the letter or like type it just so we can get a feel for it. So we've done that one in the past when we had Stephanie or PREA advocate. We would both read the letter and then we would talk about it. And then there would be some times where I would share with her, this is what I think, they're saying. And we would just review the letter and take notes so that we were providing the correct information when we were writing back. Because it is challenging. The letters are a little bit different. So for us, we found it challenging.
Yeah, that's a great tip though. Have your coworkers reread the letter as well. If there's a word that you're not able to discern, getting a second opinion, and also just rewriting it. So that way you can reread it in a way that's helpful to you. So I see Alejandra with her hand up, and then Carl will go to you next. So go for it, Alejandra.
Thank you. Hi, Edward. Hi, Jenica. So I've actually am finishing up my second month here working with Women's Center High Desert, and something that I guess I would say is what I'm struggling with is knowing when too much is too much. Because, you know, it's different from talking to our clients in person to talking to them in a letter. I just want to know, like, what would you say is the best way to just not overshare or over talk, or trying to, like, I can't even think of like how to ask it. I think what I'm trying to ask is, how do I know when enough is enough in a letter?
Yeah, I would say there's really no such thing as too much emotional support. So if that's something that you're trying to figure out and discern whether that's too much, I would say that's definitely not too much. If you're asking a lot of questions, be mindful of that, because I think that can be really overwhelming. And if you absolutely need to ask those questions, write them out in a way that's really easy to read so it doesn't blend into the paragraphs, you know, maybe bullet points. Readability is going to be really important, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But also just really appreciate folks that have said, I haven't written a letter yet, but I'm eager to learn. Welcome. I'm so excited that you're able to join this webinar prior to writing your first letter. I know many of you wrote your first letter and had not received any training yet. So kudos to all of you for being here. I'm seeing folks are echoing as well. Handwriting can be a challenge. Sometimes people are asking for things that are out of your scope of work. And that's okay. I think we often have to reiterate what we are and are not able to help folks with. And there's a way to do that with compassion and to be trauma informed. So we'll talk about that later on as well. I'm seeing Maddie say challenges can be when people write not needing anything, but they just want to get things off their chest. Some people don't make sense. Sometimes it's hard to gauge how to reply. Yeah, I think that oftentimes people are coming, you know, requesting emotional support. And I think sometimes as service providers, it's difficult to not be able to offer a service, but emotional support really is the service that we provide, especially for folks behind bars. We have to remember that they don't receive a lot of services, if at all, especially in their county jails. So to be able to talk to someone and process their trauma, and someone who particularly knows what it feels like to internalize shame and blame around sexual assault, that's going to be really important for them. So definitely don't discount the work that you do there. Wendy, I'm seeing, obviously it's a much slower pace. It can be difficult to decipher the need, and the letters are difficult to read. Sometimes they want help with their own charges and sentences more so than the sexual assault. Yep, again, kind of being able to reiterate where we're able to support and what we're not able to support. And yes, I want to also affirm it is really frustrating, and it often feels like we're not able to help with anything, and so we don't feel helpful at all. But again, I really want to remind folks the emotional support that you're providing, it can't be discounted. It really, really can't, for folks that are isolated from their communities and their family and their friends. Again, we're sometimes the only people that they're able to talk to in a confidential way. I appreciate y'all being really candid and sharing some of those challenges. I hope that what we share in the next couple of slides really helps you through that. If I missed a message and you have a question that you'd like us to respond to, feel free to drop that in the chat.
Carl had his hand up.
Carl, I'm so sorry. I said you'd be next.
Absolutely.
Carl, go for it. Thanks for the reminder, Edward.
It's good to be here with everyone. You know, the challenges with letter writing has changed. You know, as time has gone by, you know, some things I've kind of honed in and really found that work well, and then some things are constantly remaining a challenge. And I think one of the things that remains a challenge is actually branding our agency in a way that people understand what we do. We get so many people that write to us thinking that they're going to report to us. They think that that's what we provide. So the best way that we deal with that is we have an initial template we send to anyone who contacts us. And that goes out with Hope for Healing. The packet goes out in our initial template, which pretty much draws out the parameters of what our work is. You know, it lays out the fact that we don't offer any legal services, that we're here to provide emotional support, what that looks like, and what we can and can't do is some things that are also mentioned in that template. I think another real big challenge is sometimes when people do want to correspond with you, like sometimes they'll breeze over 30 years in like 2 pages. So I try to really be mindful and set the pace and say things like, hey, you know, you shared a lot with me. Thank you for doing that. Do you mind if we take it segment by segment, or, you know, focus in on this issue or this event and just kind of slow it down? And it's always good to keep your letters. So I don't physically keep a copy of any letter. They're always uploaded to our drive. And the reason I do that is like any other conversation, right? If me and you were talking about your trip to Europe last time I talked to you, I want to know where we left off. So that way, whenever I write back, at what point, whatever the case may be, it feels like an authentic conversation. And it really makes them understand that you're listening to what they said. So that's just a tip I want to throw out there. But the challenge of kind of like who we are, what we do remains a constant. So that template has really helped us with that issue.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think the very first thing you want to do when you establish contact with someone is be really clear about what you can and can't help folks with. That way we're not, you know, inadvertently providing any sort of false promises or false hope that we'll be able to make sure that that report is treated in the way that they hope for the outcome to be treated. And then I really loved what you said about asking if we can take things step by step. I think that's something that we can do really well in person or when we're over the phone, but being able to translate that into letter writing is going to be really important too. Because I think these are folks that, you know, sometimes have been in prison for 20, 30 years, and this might be their very first time talking about something that happened to them decades ago. And so that trauma gets compounded, right? And so once you find someone you can talk to, you want to let all of it out. Sometimes, not always. I don't want to make broad sweeping assumptions, but once you have someone you can talk to, it's like, you know, it's like the floodgates sort of open up. So how can we help people manage those emotions and process? Yeah, Carl, go ahead.
I just want to share one other thing. Someone else had mentioned, like, what is the right boundary? You know, how much do you share? How much don't you share it? And you know, it's really difficult. There's always kind of like that give and take in any conversation. And I think there are times where you have to, you know, share a bit, not much, but share a bit just so they understand, like, you know, it's kind of like the same mistake adults make all the time with children, right? Like, because they're always correcting children think like, oh, this person never makes mistakes, they never struggle, or they never have challenges. So you got to show some vulnerability. So there's like, it's a very fine line. And as the more you write letters, the more you'll feel like, okay, I'm going to drop this little nugget here. And then, you know, you keep, as long as your letters are more about them, for sure, than it is about you. Because when the letters become about you and less about them, then the roles have become reversed, and that's not a good place to be in.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. There are moments when we can be vulnerable, but when it's not about them anymore and the majority is about us, that's when we know we've really obviously overstepped some boundaries there. And we will definitely be talking about boundaries today. Thank you so much, Carl. Appreciate your insights always. I'm going to move forward a bit and talk about some of the questions that you all had and some of the challenges you mentioned, and I'll pass it over to Jenica.
Awesome, thank you. So when we're talking about like what we can expect with letters, letters can really vary widely in length. Carl, you talked a lot about like really long letters and really someone wanting to really cram as much information as possible in a couple pages and really make their case for something that happens pretty frequently. We might also get letters that are really short and straight and to the point. Someone who discloses really immediately what happened to them, what kind of sexual violence happened, and how can you help me with this? And are just really straightforward. Some letters can maybe not directly disclose or directly share what exactly happened. They might like allude to it, or they might put it in the middle of a really long letter and you know, bury it within a bunch of other information. You might receive a letter like someone has said in the chat that has maybe nothing to do with sexual violence, or maybe they're asking more about legal support with their case, or they're asking for other kinds of resources and whatnot. When we're receiving letters, it's really important to remember that it can be really difficult for someone to feel safe enough to disclose what's happened within the first letter. I mean, they're sending it out into the ether, so to speak, and hoping it lands where it needs to land, right? So when we're responding, it's really important for us to explain our role as an advocate, explain, you know, what support can look like from our agencies, and set kind of those clear expectations from the beginning. Someone had mentioned receiving letters that where the handwriting is really difficult or difficult to understand, or you might get a letter that's not in English. You'll want to have a plan in place to not only translate the letter that you receive, but a way to translate a letter that you're writing back. And Google Translate doesn't count. And as a general note, we want to encourage folks to stay alert for like trends and experiences and things that you read about in your letters that you might want to talk with your contact or your PCM at the facility. Not like directly, not specifically like that survivor is going through X, Y, and Z without their permission, but like if you're seeing a trend that's happening with quite a few folks, that's something that you might want to be mindful of discussing with your contact.
Yeah, so now we have some tips for you. And actually, so I put it in the chat, but Google Translate actually is really great. And I definitely use it. I do speak Spanish, but it's so you do need to go in and like, you know, read it and carefully look through it, but it works. So I definitely don't knock it.
Wait, hold on, pause a second here. Yes, Google Translate's great. I think like we're not saying don't use it. Just make sure that someone who speaks Spanish is also.
Yes, exactly. Somebody needs to read it because it does make some basic mistakes. So yeah, so now let's talk a little bit more about some of the practical aspects of letter writing. First, you'll want to answer in a timely manner, obviously, and you should try to be brief. So to answer your question, when do you know that too much is too much? I mean, more than 2 pages, I think anybody's going to sort of tune out. So if you've written more than 2 pages, you might want to find ways to trim things down. You'll want to use accessible language, and we recommend that you use an easy to read font in size 14 at least. As much as possible, we encourage you to match the writing of the survivor. But when you do not know their level of education or their literacy level, keep it at a 6th grade reading level and always aim for clarity. So be brief and clear as much as possible. The great thing about providing support via letter is that you can take your time. And then the survivor has the opportunity to read your words carefully and turn to them over and over again. And this is something that we've heard quite a bit, that people can, you know, put the letter between their bunk and the, you know, the metal bed. And when they need when they need a little bit of extra support, they can turn back to your words. So never underestimate the power of just believing somebody and letting them know that in a letter. So at the same time, there's no need to overthink your responses. You know everything that you need to know to provide support to people who are incarcerated. It's just a matter of thinking carefully about how your skills can be translated to people who are incarcerated. So just be thoughtful and remember the power of validating people's experiences and making clear that the abuse was not their fault. We recommend that you not use form letters, but you'll definitely want to come up with some template language about your agency as well as your role as an advocate. Like Carl was saying, it's really important to let people know upfront what you can and can't do and to sort of lay that stuff out. So definitely you can come up with some template language, get it approved by your agency and use that and plug it in. But as much as possible, you want to stay away from template letters and really personalize the things that you're responding. Let them know who you are and what you can and can't do. Consider any additional information about limitations or confidentiality that you think should be included in your initial response. So really think that stuff through. People who are incarcerated are accustomed to being ignored and to receiving responses that aren't helpful. So try not to add to that frustration. And that simply means being clear and consistent, setting boundaries and not making promises that you won't be able to keep. Okay, maintaining a survivor-centered approach means an investment in earning the survivor's trust by leaving assumptions behind and acknowledging that the survivor is the expert in their own journey. So you'll want to offer options rather than making decisions for them. It's also important that any personal biases about incarcerated survivors be identified and challenged. It's normal to have feelings about people, but it's our job to serve all survivors. So leave all of that stuff aside and just focus on providing the emotional support. Okay, so when reading a letter, we recommend that you start by skimming the entire letter first, getting a general sense of the type of support that the survivor is looking for. And then you can go over the letter more carefully and make note of each thing that needs to be addressed. So are there safety concerns that require more immediate action? What are the trauma symptoms that are being mentioned? Are there coping skills that you can offer or resources that you should include? And then with these notes, you can create a simple outline to ensure that you're responding to all relevant portions of the survivor's letter. So you'll want to make or you'll want to ask about their personal approaches to safety planning, coping mechanisms, and self-care. And then offer approaches that would be relevant to their current circumstances. And since you won't know everything about their current circumstances, you'll want to ask questions. And remember that the survivor probably knows best how to keep themselves safe. So ask, offer options rather than, telling them what to do. If applicable, you can offer reporting options while explaining that the decision whether or not to report is ultimately theirs, and your services aren't dependent on whether they report or not. Then since the goal is to provide ongoing care, you'll want to build rapport and trust by being honest, consistent, and caring. Treat letters the same way you would a hotline call or a one-on-one session. And as I mentioned earlier, the cool part about letters is that you have the opportunity to edit yourself and include those things that we always wish we'd said. When you're on a call or in person, you think about that perfect thing to offer later. And letters offer you the opportunity to edit yourself and to include all of that. So as a best practice, you'll want to ask questions to invite an ongoing communication. And of course, you should thank the survivor for writing to you, acknowledge the courage that it takes to reach out for help, and then let them know that you're looking forward to their response and that you're available for additional support.
So we're going to talk a little bit about setting boundaries and how to do that when writing letters. So first, we're going to take a look at professional versus personal, right? So professional boundaries or professional relationships might be time bound. There are clear roles. There's a beginning and an end. A counseling session would have a beginning and an end. A letter, you send one, you receive one, right? A personal relationship would be something that's a little bit more fluid. It would be a friend or a family member. It's typically not time bound, and those roles can change. So I can be supporting my friend one day and they can be supporting me another day. As an advocate, you know, you'll have an obligation to maintain those professional boundaries that guide the advocate and client relationship. And doing so will hopefully allow your clients to learn how to mirror those boundaries with you and even with like future professionals that they may come in contact with. Your clients might not always explicitly focus on the abuse or harassment they've experienced. So it can be helpful to focus on other topics about their recovery and healing. This could mean talking about coping skills, support systems, some of the safety planning that Edward was talking about, other things that would support them and foster healing. We can, you know, co-create goals through our letter writing and like really discuss what this can look like that can help us like stay on track. We do want to be cautious when we're disclosing any personal stories as a way to connect with your client or a way to illustrate a specific point. There were folks earlier talking about, you know, sharing page and page and page of your own personal stories and that not really being appropriate. It's natural to want to do that, especially if you are a survivor yourself. But if you notice yourself slipping into that space or your boundaries are changing, it's really important for us to take a step back and ask ourselves, you know, what's changed? Why am I feeling inclined to share this part of my story? Why am I feeling inclined to overstep my boundary? What purpose would this serve? And it can, you know, be helpful to go over your options. How am I going to handle the situation? Who can I talk to and reach out to for feedback? What colleague can I kind of share this with and talk it out? And how you're going to approach the situation. Lastly, it's really important for us to maintain consistent, fair, and firm boundaries. Clients may reach out and ask us to mail letters or contact family members or their, you know, public defender, and we'll need to be able to effectively and compassionately communicate what we're unable to do. We also want to make sure that we are setting realistic expectations as an advocate and that we're transparent about the ways that your advocacy may not have the results that they want, right? So let's say you've received consent for to reach out to the facility on their behalf and advocate, you know, for an additional interview or advocate, you know, for something. It might not happen. We all know that that's, you know, it might not happen and it might not result in something that that a survivor really needs. We never want to overpromise anything. If you find yourself unsure of how to like navigate that or how to respond to certain questions or experiences, you're always, you know, welcome to reach out to us. You're welcome to obviously reach out to your peers and your team.
All right. So you'll want to provide options for coping skills and safety planning that make sense in a detention setting. So for example, it might not be possible to help a survivor come up with a plan to avoid a perpetrator, since they have little control over their movement. Also, if the perpetrator is staff or a gang member, reporting might not be a safe option, just as going to the police isn't always safe for some communities. So you'll want to let the survivor lead. As I mentioned earlier, ask questions, offer options. They really do know best how to keep themselves safe and what they can do within the system to have their needs met. If someone shares that they're having trouble coping, you can offer things like progressive muscle relaxation, which doesn't require any additional materials and can be done without calling attention to themselves. You can also offer other forms of grounding, mindfulness, or journal prompts. Marcela just put in the chat a link to a progressive muscle relaxation handout that we share regularly with people. Yeah, this form of support, letter writing, really allows you to do research to find relevant resources and worksheets that would be beneficial. There's plenty of stuff out there. Marcela shared the one resource. We have other stuff. We're always working on new stuff. So if you need ideas, again, feel free to reach out anytime. It really is what we're here for. And we love to hear from you. So if you're stuck and you don't know what you could share with a survivor, feel free to reach out and let us know. what the person you're writing to needs.
Thank you so much, Edward. And I see a question in here about whether incarcerated survivors are writing letters to us about sexual assault that occurred while incarcerated in the past, or both. Both, yeah, absolutely. And so in some of our other webinars, we lay out the PREA standards, and the PREA standards specifically say that survivors behind bars have a right to access emotional support and sexual assault counselors, whether or not the abuse happened while incarcerated or prior to incarceration. So it really depends on the survivor themselves, and we don't really, turn people away based on when it happened, just in the same way that we wouldn't turn anybody away in the community.
And also people, people who are homeless or in active addiction may be unable to really go there. So not, I mean, certainly not that incarceration is a way to, as a good thing, but often people who are locked up, will go on medication for the first time, will have time to think about things for the first time, or sobering up for the first time. So it could, past trauma could be coming up for them for the first time. So yeah, definitely you'll be hearing from people who were assaulted before and or during incarceration.
And I also wanted to answer the second part of the question where you asked, are you writing differently depending on whether the incident occurred in prison or outside of it? Yeah, so if it happened prior to incarceration, you likely won't be saying, hey, would you like to report? Here are some options. It will be likely more around processing and providing resources around self-blame and really working through shame. When it's something that happened while they were incarcerated, it tends to be much more about reporting if that's something that they're interested in, or maybe safety planning. So it's much more about their immediate needs rather than processing. And of course, it's different for every survivor. I don't want to speak for everybody, but those tend to be the differences. For Christina, I'm seeing you ask, how do we address letters from those that may have caused harm and are currently participating in restorative justice or restorative practice circles? That's a good question. I think typically we wouldn't even know whether someone has caused harm. We typically don't ask, what their charges are. We really don't recommend that we do that, since that's not what we're addressing. But in the cases where you do know, maybe somebody disclosed to you, and that's part of their way of holding themselves accountable to be really honest with their service provider, I don't think that you should treat it any differently. I think sometimes survivors or folks in correctional facilities will ask us, well, can you provide services specifically for folks that have caused harm? And you can let them know that's not necessarily your area of expertise, and that your area of expertise is working with survivors of sexual assault. And of course, there are people that have caused harm and people that are also survivors at the very same time. And I've written letters to folks who have both caused harm and have been survivors. And sometimes that looks like talking about accountability. And sometimes that looks like how did child sexual abuse impact them? So I really want folks to also assess what they feel comfortable with in terms of talking about sexual abuse, if the person is the person who enacted violence. If you don't feel equipped to have that conversation, really focus on what it looks like for them to heal the sexual abuse that they themselves experienced. We really aren't in the business of turning people away and finding out what their charges are or what they have caused, what they may have committed. We're really coming from a place of trauma pushes people into prisons, trauma pushes people into jails. And so how can we address some of the trauma that they didn't get to talk about, that they didn't get to process, that they didn't get resources for, rather than sort of reinforcing the punishment that they're already experiencing. We're not an extension of the prison or the jail. We really are, staying true to our mission and our vision by continuing to provide victim services. So I hope that answers your question, Christina.
And I'll just say, like, it's important to be clear. Like, we at JDI, we just clearly state, we can provide support around the abuse that you experienced, but we don't, we're not, like you said, Marcela, our work isn't around causing harm. So just making those clear distinctions. Yeah, and just addressing the harm that they've experienced.
Yeah, and we really want to deliver that message in a non-judgmental way, not like we don't provide those services because you're a bad person, but rather because that's not our expertise. And we can't handle, or we can't, that a restorative justice practice is not part of a lot of the services we provide. I know some folks are wanting to learn those things, but if we don't have the expertise, we don't want to dish out something we don't have the expertise in. So really, really appreciate that question. Thanks for chiming in too, Edward. All right, so we have some time to think about these questions. And I think these questions are really helpful to have side by side as you're reading a letter, as you're assessing what people's needs are. So these 5 questions, hold on to them. I will drop them in the chat so that you can keep them around. Maybe you put that on a cork board if people still use those, whatever you have. So the 5 questions are: identify the problem or problems that you would hope to address in your response, the problems that your writer is sharing in their letter. Identify what the survivor is asking for support on. Sometimes it's implicit and sometimes it's explicit. You can always offer and ask questions. And then describe what kind of emotional support you would provide. Identify what you can do and what your barriers are to helping them. And then identify how you can continue providing ongoing support to the survivor. A great way of doing this is by always ending your letter with a question and asking, if there's anything else that you can help out with that they haven't already mentioned. So those are the 5 questions that we're going to use as we are reading this one letter that's going to come up on the screen in a second here. And I'm going to read it out loud for folks. You can read along with me as well. I'm not sure who else to reach out to about this. I trust no one here. I need help. A few days ago, something happened with another prisoner. I feel dirty and gross, and for some reason, I can't stop blaming myself. I do not know what to do. I haven't told anyone about this. I want to report him, but I'm afraid, can I even do that? I do not even have any proof, so is it even worth it? I also see him every day. How am I supposed to live like this? How can you help me through this? So there's a couple different issues here. There are some feelings that are coming up. There are some challenges in terms of safety coming up. So let's talk about first, what is the problem? What are the problems? Because there isn't just one. What are the problems that you're seeing here in this letter written by an incarcerated survivor? Feel free to drop it in the chat. You can unmute yourself. I see Alejandra has done so.
They're blaming themselves.
Absolutely, they're blaming themselves. They're saying they feel dirty and they feel gross. They can't stop blaming themselves. Yeah, they're wanting to report, but they're afraid to do so. Oftentimes people are afraid of retaliation. The code of silence in prisons and jails is really strong. So wanting to hear from an advocate whether it's safe to do so. They might want some affirmations there or validation. And I want to remind folks too, we can't ever guarantee safety in a prison or a jail. So we want to be really mindful of how we respond to that. We don't want to say, yes, it's safe to do so, or no, it's absolutely not safe to do so. We want to be able to paint a picture of what may or may not happen. Someone is saying here, need safety planning because they see them every day. Absolutely. They're seeing their abuser every day. Yep, absolutely. Really triggering to see this person. Yep. You all named it. You all named it. All right. So what is the survivor asking for support on, implicitly or explicitly? I know folks already mentioned reporting and safety planning. What is something that maybe they're not implicitly asking for support on? Maddie's saying emotional support. Yeah, I think that's the one thing that people don't outright ask for. Hey, can you get me some emotional support? People will not say that. They will often say things like, I feel dirty and gross. I feel like this is my fault. And that is like our advocate brain goes off and we're like, yes, let's provide some validation there. Let's eliminate those thoughts. And, you know, obviously we can't always eliminate those entirely, but we can help people have a different perspective. Yeah, Brianna's saying need help with reporting. All right. What emotional support would folks provide in this case?
Help them understand that none of this is their fault. Assure them that, you know, whatever you experienced, it wasn't your fault. Whatever you did to provoke them, it's not on you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Edward's saying, I believe you. I hear you and I'm here for you. Telling them it wasn't their fault, maybe some breathing techniques. Absolutely. I think that's another piece too, is we might go straight to, let me tell you what the reporting options are. But what are some coping mechanisms? What are some ways to help regulate their nervous system when they are getting triggered? That can be a piece of safety planning as well. All right, so folks are already kind of mentioning what they can do to support the person, but I'm curious to hear what is within your realm or your scope of work. What can you do to support them, and what are some barriers to helping them?
That they probably can't trust anybody, that there's good reason for the distrust.
Yeah, I know sometimes we'll mention to folks, okay, if you're interested in reporting, is there anybody that you feel safe with at the facility? And someone might say, I don't feel safe with anybody. So that could be a barrier. Oftentimes another barrier we see too, especially with county jails, is that they often don't have an outside reporting agency that survivors can go to and say, I want to make a report. I don't feel comfortable making this report directly to any of the correctional facility staff and making this report to the outside reporting agency. So it could be really challenging in that way. Christina, I'm seeing delay in communication or transfers from facilities. Absolutely. Someone might, you know, ask about the reporting process and you send that information, and then you don't know if they reported, you don't know how things are going, you don't know the outcome of the investigation. Absolutely. And then also transfers from facilities. Yes, absolutely. Highly recommend to check CDCR's inmate locator and the respective county jail locators, so that you know that when you're sending a letter off that the person is still incarcerated at that same prison or jail. Always want to double check that before you send the letter out. Sarah, I'm seeing you say accessibility is always a barrier. Absolutely. I'm seeing someone say getting a confidential space to meet. Yeah, so someone's already talking about in-person services. Sometimes the letter might say, I don't want to talk about stuff in this letter. I want to see you in person. And so it can be a barrier if you don't always already have an established relationship with the prison or the jail that would allow you to meet with someone in person, let alone in a confidential space. So I'm going to plug really quickly. We have 2 webinars coming up on setting up services and providing services that will talk a lot about how do we set up services. And a huge piece of this is confidential spaces, confidential communication, and making sure that that's in your MOU and that it's really being respected after the MOU is put in place. All right, y'all. So I'm going to use my discernment and say that we probably don't have time for for a small group. So I'm going to keep this conversation in the large group and go ahead and go through this second letter. So I'll read it out loud and then we'll go ahead and go through the same questions that we went through in the previous one. Dear advocate, I filed a report after my assault last month, but nothing has happened and no one came to investigate or even speak with me. I just found out that the investigation is closed and was unfounded. I'm so confused. The CO that assaulted me still works in the unit that I'm stuck in. I have to see him every day. It is painful and traumatizing. I don't know what to do anymore. Do you think you can talk to someone to see if I can move to another housing unit? Do you also think you can help me find out anything about my report and why no one came to interview me? All right. it's so hard for me not to go ahead and answer these questions for you. So I'm going to ask them again and allow you all to respond to the questions. So can folks go ahead and identify the problems that you would hope to address in your response? Yep, clarity on case status, absolutely. Wanting to know what happened, how come no one came to speak to me? And this is a huge, huge question that happens all the time. They made a report, there was a conclusion made, no one came to talk to the survivor. And this can be really challenging, once again, if you don't have a relationship with the jail, to be able to figure out, hey, what was the update on the investigation? Yeah, Maddie's mentioning again, no one reached out to them after the report, stating boundaries of what we can do for them. Criminal advocacy, absolutely. So in this case, I mentioned again, if we don't have a very strong relationship with the jail, it can be really difficult to get an update from ISU, from the investigative services unit, from the PREA coordinator. And so we want to be really mindful of that, right? When we're writing back to this survivor, that you can let them know, I will do my best to get an update from you, but oftentimes what is shared within the jail or the prison is not shared with outside folks. And so really, again, using your discernment, if you just started your relationship with your jail, and even if you have established the relationship, you might want to ask, what is your investigation process like? Do you typically reach out to survivors? And if their answer is no, that's probably not a great sign, right? And so you want to have a conversation and let them know that you often get letters from survivors asking for investigation updates, and that you oftentimes don't know what to say. And sometimes you can use your own curiosity and lack of knowledge on the system to your own advantage, to be like, hey, I really want to understand your system. Can I get some updates or get a better sense of how investigations are processed and how you communicate with folks and update them? And let them know that it really is trauma informed to be able to be transparent. We're aware that folks are understaffed at jails and may not have made the time to update folks. But that is really important for folks to know what the outcome of the investigation is. So a lot of this is institutional advocacy being asked of you. Let's see. I'm also seeing this question of what is the survivor asking for support on, wanting to move to a different housing unit. I'm already kind of answering the question here because we're running out of some time here. But if other folks are seeing as well, other things the survivor is asking for, let me know. I know folks mentioned already updates on the investigation process. In terms of emotional support, what kind of emotional support would folks provide here? You might want to recognize that the ways in which the investigation or lack thereof, also the outcome of it, and continued contact with abuser causes re-traumatization. Not hearing about the investigation can really take the power away from a survivor. Really being able to recognize how this lack of transparency and accountability within the system impacts the survivor. And then also recognizing the fear caused by seeing the perpetrator regularly. So really thinking about ongoing safety concerns. And Wendy, I'm seeing a question here that says, is there a way to do that when you aren't necessarily welcome as an advocate? And by that, do you mean getting an investigation update? Unless you have a relationship with the jail, it's really, really difficult to get an update. And even if you do have a relationship with the jail, it's still difficult. So I wish there was sort of a magic wand to say, this is how I get that update, so there really is no sort of magic wand to get an update. It really is dependent on having a good relationship either with the PREA coordinator or with ISU, and continuing to build that relationship. I think oftentimes what happens is that jails or prisons and the folks that work in them think that we're trying to meddle with the investigation process. I think this happens in the community as well when you're working with law enforcement, that they think that you're trying to get them in trouble or to, again, meddle in their investigation or become the investigator. But really being able to articulate why transparency and updates are so integral to the safety and mental health of survivors and people behind bars. That's going to be really important to be able to have those conversations, to provide that training, not just to the PREA coordinator, but to everybody involved, so that they're aware, you know, there are some things that they just don't know. The same work that.
And Wendy, I'd say that you should follow up with us after, so that we can talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah. And Wendy, if you could let us know which state you're from, because I don't think, oh, RJ
Donovan, yeah.
I was, I didn't say the RJ in front. Okay, yeah, definitely reach out to us. I will drop my email in the chat, and if my team can do the same, that would be awesome. So in this case, it's going to be really important not to make any false promises, right? We're not going to say, I'm absolutely going to get you an update on the investigation. You can let them know that you'll do your best. But again, that oftentimes these things are on a need to know basis within the system itself. And because we're not part of the system, we're not guaranteed an update. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on this particular scenario? In terms of the housing unit, I should mention that's another piece we don't want to make any false promises on. We do want to be able to make a safety plan with them. It can be really challenging to make a safety plan. Edward, I know you talk about this quite often in terms of creating safety plans, and talking about, you know, if someone's going to the restroom or taking a shower, to have a peer or a buddy be on the lookout if they're not really feeling safe in those spaces. So really being able to have, you know, someone who's supportive within the jail or the prison is going to be important. All right, so we have some time for questions. I'm going to let folks kind of think about what questions they want to ask, and also share some additional resources. So if you haven't already, check out the Valor US website and the Just Detention International website. Both of our websites have specific resources for advocates that work with incarcerated survivors. The PREA Resource Center is another great resource. It's specifically the technical assistance and training provider for correctional agencies around PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. So while it isn't catered to advocates, it's really nice to be able to have this resource, because it's, if our correctional partners are asking us certain questions about the PREA standards, we can go to this website and share some of those resources with them. One of the main handouts I want to share from the Valor website is our letter writing handout. So go ahead and click on that, save that, print it out, put that on your cork board, keep it by you when you're writing letters. And I'm seeing someone ask, what kind of training could we offer to PREA coordinators and to COs? Number one, training trauma-informed care and how it shows up in detention settings. Being able to teach them the difference between a trigger and a trauma response versus something that they often view as something that needs to be disciplined. Oftentimes survivors will do something that correctional partners perceive as acting out. And so being able to teach them how to have empathy in some ways and to be much more trauma informed, that's a huge piece. The role of the advocate, really differentiating between what your role is as an advocate versus a therapist behind bars is going to be really important, because I know that folks will often say, my correctional partner thinks we're irrelevant or we're not necessary because we have therapists. But oftentimes therapists behind bars are not trained in sexual abuse or trauma, and can sometimes re-traumatize folks by saying the wrong thing. I'm seeing Sarah say, we tell the PREA coordinators that we are collaborators, not meddlers. Yeah, I love the idea also of talking about what does a partnership look like between the two of you, and what are your common goals? At the end of the day, we all want to create safety and security within the prison, in the jail, in the juvenile halls. So how do we do that from our respective roles? Sarah's asking, do they welcome training from outside agencies? Those are questions specific to your jail. It's really going to depend on your relationship. Some agencies are like, yes, come do a training with us. Some agencies are like, we don't need a training. We already have enough trainings. We don't need more. And I'm not telling you that so that you give up. You can always keep trying. That's one thing I will say, stay consistent, and keep asking, and eventually you'll get someone that'll say yes, because there's a lot of turnover. PREA coordinators don't stay the same. And so you can always ask the newest PREA coordinator, because there's lots of turnover. Okay, some more resources. The Valor US Hub is also available for you. This is separate from the Valor website and has specific resources that are not available to the public. So you do have to create a login. Last but not least, we also have JDI's website and link to resources for California advocates. I'll drop that link in the chat. And then last but not least, I also have a survey for all of you to complete and give us some feedback on how the workshop went. If you have any other questions, feel free to put those in the survey or to email all of us. I will put my email address in the chat once again. I really, really appreciate all of your candidness and your questions and your thoughts and around challenges and ways of supporting folks behind bars. This does conclude the end of the session, but like I mentioned, please do reach out to us if you still have any other questions. We really look forward to seeing all of you in our upcoming webinars.
Hi, Marcella, where's the survey?
It should be in the chat.
Okay.
I can.
Will we also email it out after?
Yeah, we'll email.
Okay, please.
Drop it in the chat again. Yeah.
Okay, I see it.
Bye, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.